Near midnight, the Blackpine Range was quiet enough to hear your own pulse. Pines stood rigid in the cold, and a thin wind hissed across stone. Galen Roane, a self-taught sky watcher and stubborn solo camper, sat on a log beside his tent and studied the stars through tired binoculars. He had spent his life wanting one honest glimpse of something not from Earth. A flash cut the sky. It was too bright to be a meteor, and it did not fade. It broke into glowing fragments and dropped behind the next ridge, and a blunt impact followed, close enough to lift dirt under Galen's boots. Birds erupted from the canopy and scattered into the dark. Galen grabbed his headlamp, his pack, and the small medical pouch he always carried. He moved downhill toward Ravenfall Basin, careful but fast, breathing hard through cold air. The smell reached him first, hot plastic and scorched metal, like a workshop fire. In a shallow clearing, a black scar gouged the ground. At the end of it sat a sphere half buried, about the size of a large drum. Its surface was dented and split, and heat shimmered above it, and a faint clicking came from inside. Not random, like a machine trying to restart. He did not know its name then. Later he would hear it called the Lumen Orb. Galen slowed, scanning for wires, mines, or anything staged. He saw only broken brush and steaming soil. A seam around the sphere opened with a soft hiss, and the top lifted and locked. Something moved in the opening. His headlamp revealed a figure curled inside the cramped shell. She looked almost human. Her skin was pale like porcelain. Brown hair clung to her forehead, and her ears tapered to subtle points. When her eyes opened, they were golden brown and reflective, like a cat's eyes catching light. She was bleeding. Dark stains spread along her side and smeared the inner wall. Her breathing was shallow and uneven, and she could not sit up. Galen swallowed and spoke anyway. "Can you hear me?" he asked. "What is your name?" Her lips moved, but no sound came. She blinked once, slow, as if it cost her. His gaze caught on a seamless band at her wrist, where a point of light pulsed at a steady rhythm, more like a heartbeat than a screen. Galen had seen plenty of gear in the backcountry. Emergency beacons, watches, satellite messengers, but this looked grown into the skin, not strapped on. The light did not flicker with signal bars. It held steady, as if it was listening. He hovered a finger over it and forced himself to pause. If this was a trap, the first person to touch the wrong thing would be the first person to vanish. He pictured headlines, a blurred photo, and a single word, unexplained. Yet the woman in the sphere was bleeding out in front of him, and leaving her there felt like a choice he would carry for the rest of his life. He touched the band. The pulse changed. It sped up for an instant, then settled into a new pattern, warmer in color, faint amber instead of cold white. The sphere answered with a soft tone, almost polite. The woman focused on his hand, then on his face, as if connecting the two. Her lips moved again, and this time a breathy sound escaped. Not a name, more like a warning. Her fingers twitched toward the band, then fell, weak. Galen pulled back, heart pounding. Beyond the clearing, the wind kept hissing through the pines. Under it, he heard a distant mechanical hum that did not belong to the mountains. He looked at the blood on her clothing and made the simplest decision of his life and the most dangerous. He slid his arms under her shoulders and knees and lifted. She was lighter than he expected, all bone and cold muscle, and she flinched when the motion tugged the wound. Galen steadied his grip and turned away from the sphere, leaving a trail of disturbed ash behind him. An hour later, the Stonuran shelter smelled of damp wood and antiseptic wipes. Galen had carried the injured woman through brush and slick rock, stopping whenever her weight sagged and her breath hitched. His cabin was small, one room, a stove, a cot, and shelves of supplies saved from many seasons. He laid her on the cot and fed the stove until the metal warmed the air. Her skin was too cold, and her hands shook when she tried to lift them. He wrapped her in blankets and checked her wound by lantern light. The cut along her side looked jagged and burned at the edges, as if torn by heat. Galen boiled water from Mossline Creek and cleaned what he could. He had no proper antibiotics, only a few old tablets he had been saving for a night when infection would kill him before help arrived. He rolled one between his fingers, weighing the risk like a stone. If her biology was close to human, it might buy time. If it was not, it could shut her down. He set the tablets back in the bottle and tightened the cap until his knuckles went white. For now, warmth and clean water were the only safe medicine he trusted. He used a field canister of suture foam, meant for emergencies when stitches were not possible. He tested it, then pressed it gently along the wound to seal and support. The woman exhaled through clenched teeth. Her eyes stayed open, tracking every motion. Galen kept his voice steady. "I am Galen Roane," he said. "You are safe for now. Do you understand me?" She tried to speak. Rough syllables came out, low and strained, and she stopped, frustrated. She reached for the edge of the blanket and, with a shaking finger, traced a simple shape on the wood beside her. A circle, then a line pointing outward. Like a root, Galen could not tell if it meant home or danger. She pointed at her wrist. The band was brighter now, pulsing slow and deliberate, like it was counting. She shook her head and pushed her palm toward him. A clear warning not to touch it again. Then dragged a finger across her throat in a cutting gesture and pressed her hand to her chest. "Touching it gets you killed?" Galen asked. She blinked once, hard, and held his gaze. The meaning landed without translation. Her lips moved again, and this time she forced out a single word that sounded like a name. "Sarah," she whispered. Galen repeated it carefully, as if saying it wrong might break something. "Sarah," he said. "All right." Galen checked his supplies. Water and food were fine. Batteries were not. His radio was old and mostly useless in these mountains. He had prepared for storms and injuries, not for a crash from the sky. Outside, a faint hum drifted in, rising and falling in a grid pattern. Galen realized the stove was a beacon. Heat bled through logs and roof. A warm square in a cold forest. He banked the fire lower. Enough to keep her alive but not enough to glow like a flare. And he wiped the blood from the floorboards so it would not leave a clean trail. Galen moved to the window and lifted the curtain a finger width. High above the tree line, a small light swept across the forest. Then another. Rotors, multiple, circling with patience. He lowered the curtain and looked back at Sarah. "Are they looking for you?" he asked. She did not answer with words. She placed her hand over the band as if to hide its glow. And her breathing grew faster. Just before dawn, Galen's phone found a thin slice of signal. An alert appeared on the screen that read, "Emergency Stability Office. Temporary perimeter restrictions in effect." The details would not open. A second line replaced it and read, "Silence warrant active. Remain in place. Report unusual activity." Galen stared at the words until his eyes hurt. He had heard of silence warrants after chemical spills or attacks. Never in a quiet basin of pines and rock. He tried to place a call anyway. And the screen spun, then failed, as if the mountain itself refused to carry his voice. He glanced at Sarah. She was awake, watching him with a calm that looked practiced. "They're coming," Galen said. "They want people to report anything. We have to be careful." Her wristband shifted. The pulse tightened. Faster now. Urgent. She pressed her palm against it, trying to quiet it, then shook her head at Galen again. "Do not open. Do not trigger." The rotor hum grew louder. Not one drone but many. They swept, paused, and swept again, as if painting the forest with invisible lines. A voice crackled through the trees. Amplified and official, too far to catch every word. Galen checked the window. In the gray early light, figures moved between trunks on the lower slope. They were not hikers. They kept spacing, scanning the ground and the air, and some carried long cases that looked too rigid for camping gear. Others unfolded compact frames into antenna shapes and planted them in the dirt with practiced speed. When they adjusted the angles, the rotor hum overhead shifted, as if the drones were syncing to the new grid. A patch flashed on one jacket when the figure passed a gap in the trees. It read Hazard Recovery Detachment. Recovery, not rescue. Galen felt a cold certainty settle in his gut. He looked at Sarah, at the band on her wrist, and understood what the team would do if they found her. The band began to throb in a tight pattern. Sarah formed a word in her own language and repeated it twice. Her eyes said the rest. "Do not give me back." Galen killed the lantern and drew the curtains. He packed water, the remaining medical supplies, and his last good batteries. He grabbed a small knife. Not for a fight, but to cut through brush if he had to. And he left the radio because noise would only point a finger. He checked the back hatch and the narrow run behind the cabin. A steep drop into tangled undergrowth that most people avoided. Galen had cleared a rough path there years ago for emergencies. A way to vanish into the terrain. It was ugly and hard, but it did not look like a door from the front. A drone dipped low over the roof. Its rotors chopped the air into a hard roar, and a narrow beam of light slid across the cabin wall and glittered in dust between the logs. Boots crunched on frozen leaves outside. Then a voice called, "Closer," clipped and controlled. "Galen Roane, this is a safety order." The voice said, "Open your door and step outside." Galen's blood ran cold. They knew his name. He helped Sarah to her feet. She leaned on him, light and unsteady, jaw tight with pain, and her breathing scraped like sandpaper. For a moment Galen thought she would collapse. Then she planted her feet and met his eyes, as if asking him to commit. He nodded once, because hesitation was a luxury they no longer had. He guided her to the back hatch that opened into brush behind the cabin. As he unlatched it, the drone beam swung back and steadied on the front door, like a finger pointing. The band on her wrist kept flashing its urgent rhythm, as if counting down to something it would not explain. The voice outside stayed calm, close enough now that Galen could hear the patience in it. Galen eased the hatch open and guided Sarah into the brush behind Stonerin shelter. He did not run. He slipped downhill into alder and wet ferns, using the creek line he had cleared years ago. Cold branches slapped his shoulders, and water soaked his sleeves within minutes. Sarah shivered hard, her breath loud in the thin morning air. Galen pressed her deeper into shadow and waited for the drone to climb. The men outside did not chase blindly. They fanned out in a practiced grid, lights low and narrow. They were searching for heat and for silence. Warden Luke Marrow moved at the center of that grid. He kept his rifle slung as if it was only a tool. And his eyes did most of the work. When he stopped, the others stopped with him. A woman knelt beside the cabin wall and touched a gloved hand to the logs. "Warm," she said. Marrow nodded once and pointed toward the back of the cabin. Two men moved behind Stonerin shelter. Galen heard them first, a careful crunch, then a pause. He pulled Sarah into a hollow between roots and pressed a hand over her mouth. Gentle but firm, Sarah's eyes widened, and she held still, even as the pulse at her wrist sped up, then slowed, like it was thinking. One man pushed through brush and stopped a few paces away. His light swept across damp ground, across snapped twigs, across a faint smear that Galen knew was blood. He followed it as if it was a sentence written for him. Marrow stepped in behind him and crouched. "Fresh," he said. He looked toward the creek, then to the tree line beyond it, as if he could already see the route. "Spread to the waterline," Marrow said. "He will try to kill the heat trail." A technician jogged up with a handset. "Sir, we can bring the thermal net lower," she said. Marrow shook his head. "Not yet," he replied. "If we press too hard, he runs fast. We want him slow." Galen's jaw clenched. Marrow was not hunting with anger. He was hunting with patience. Up the slope, a portable frame unfolded on metal legs. Two technicians locked panels into place. It looked like an open cage made of dark ribs, with coils along the edges. A man in a headset checked a tablet. "Field null cage is live," he said. "Signal floor is dropping." Galen's phone buzzed once in his pocket, then went dead again. The mountain did not feel empty anymore. It felt managed. Marrow listened, then nodded. "Good," he said. "If it pings, we will hear it." Galen felt Sarah tense against him. The pulse flickered once through her sleeve, then steadied. She shook her head, small and furious, like she was trying to deny the cage any power. The search line moved closer. Galen waited until the drone hum faded, then pulled Sarah down the creek, stepping in water that burned like ice. He kept his feet under the surface, using current to swallow sound. They reached a bend where boulders formed a pocket under the bank. Galen ducked Sarah into it and crouched beside her. His hands were numb, and Sarah's lips were gray. Above them, Marrow spoke again, still calm. Cabin owner is Galen Roane. He said, local record shows he lives off-grid. A second voice answered. Do we take him? We take the object, Marrow replied. We take anyone who blocks that. Marrow lifted a small tablet and traced a circle on its map with a gloved finger. He drew a tightening ring, then handed the tablet back. Mark his shelter as a focus point, he said. If he breaks north, cut him off at the ridge. Boots passed along the bank, close enough that muddy drops fell onto the rock near Galen's face. When they moved on, Galen let air out slowly and looked at Sarah. She tracked him with a focus that felt too awake for someone losing blood. She tugged his sleeve once, telling him to move. Galen whispered. All right, he said, but you have to tell me what that is. A little later, they climbed into a narrow ravine where rock blocked the wind. Galen made Sarah sit on a flat stone and checked the foam seal on her wound. It held, but the skin around it was inflamed. Her body fought the injury with what little heat it had left. Galen pulled a ration heat brick from his pack and clicked it on. The small pad warmed, weak but real, and he tucked it against Sarah's side under her jacket. That is all I have, he said. We cannot light a fire. Sarah nodded, breathing shallow. Her eyes were too bright now. Galen handed her water. Drink, he said. Sarah drank in small pulls. Then she took his notepad and pencil. Her hand trembled, but her eyes stayed sharp. She wrote in uneven English, each word hard-won. Haven Seal. Galen read it out loud. Haven Seal, he said. That is your wristband? Sarah nodded. She wrote again. Refuge claim. Galen frowned. You are asking for asylum? He asked. Sarah nodded once, then wrote a third line. Astor Refuge Compact. The words sounded like law. So there are rules, Galen said. Sarah underlined the next sentence twice. Claim binds both sides. Galen felt cold in a new way. Both sides meaning you and them? He asked. Sarah tilted the pencil toward the forest, then back toward the sky. She tapped the word compact again, then wrote, Asylum latch. What does it do? Galen asked. Sarah took a breath and wrote slowly. Wrong open. She paused. Forced open. She drew a small circle and a jagged line through it. Burns me. It kills you, Galen said. Sarah nodded, but kept writing. Burns record around. Galen looked at the line and understood in pieces. It destroys data nearby? He asked. Sarah pointed at his phone, at his hands, at the trees, like the place itself could be erased in a different way than fire. Galen swallowed. That is why they are sealing the whole basin, he said. Sarah wrote a final line, pressing deep. They will not let me live. Galen wanted to argue. Then he remembered Marrow's steady voice and the way the search teams moved like a machine. Why? Galen asked. Sarah lifted her sleeve enough for him to see the pulse. It had turned amber and tight. She wrote one more word. Witness. Galen tucked the notepad into his jacket. Then we keep you alive, he said, long enough to make your claim real. Sarah gripped his wrist. Her hand was cold, but the grip was firm. She made a small cutting motion toward the trees. Galen understood. They would cut the story out before it could be told. By mid-afternoon, the forest sounded controlled. Drones moved in loops that did not drift, and loudspeakers repeated the same calm warning, as if practice made it true. Galen and Sarah stayed low and moved along stone whenever they could. And they skirted old relay cutline, where straight corridors in the trees made an easy path for a drone to read. When they crossed open ground, Galen felt the air press against his skin, as if eyes were part of the weather. They reached a ridge that overlooked Ravenfall Basin. Below, the scar where the lumen orb had hit was fenced with bright tape and portable lights. Vehicles sat along the dirt access road with antennas like thorns, and at the center a temporary command post had taken shape. Men and women moved with clipboards and cases. The work looked like disaster response. only cleaner, as if the goal was to reset. A man stepped from the command tent and paused, hands behind his back. He wore no helmet, his hair clipped short and gray at the temples, and he watched the basin with the attention of someone who had already accepted the cost. Galen knew the posture from news clips after crises. Colonel Rowan Cade. Near him, a woman in a neat jacket opened a case and set papers on a folding table. She wrote with brisk precision and did not look up when others spoke. Etta Bryce. A runner approached Cade and handed him a headset. Cade listened for a moment, then spoke softly. Marrow has contact on the cabin owner. He said, keep him alive if possible. We need answers. Galen heard fragments carried on the wind. Red perimeter. Cade answered, calm. Seal every exit route, he said. No hikers, no press. If you see a camera, you take it. A technician pointed at a display. Cade leaned in, listened, then straightened. If a single burst gets out, we treat it as escalation. He said, we do not wait for anyone to bless it. Sarah tensed beside Galen. She pulled her sleeve tighter over the pulse. Etta Bryce spoke to a cluster of officers. Silence warrant remains active, she said. Noncompliance is a security threat. Detain first, document later. Cade lifted a hand, and a group moved out carrying more dark-ribbed frames. More field null cage units followed, and another team with heavier packs moved into the tree line. Gear tuned for listening, not for lifting. Cade watched them go, then spoke into a handset. His voice carried through the basin on speakers, smooth and almost polite. Galen Roane, he said, this is Colonel Rowan Cade with the Terran Containment Authority. You are sheltering a classified hazard, and you do not understand what you are holding. Galen kept still. Sarah's breathing turned shallow. If you step out now, you will be treated as a witness, not a suspect, Cade said. If you run, the perimeter will tighten until it breaks you. Cade paused. This ends tonight, he said. Galen backed away from the ridge, pulling Sarah with him. He did not know how Cade had learned his name so fast. But he understood the point. The system knew his cabin, his trails, and his habits. They moved downhill into thicker brush. A drone swung in from the left, low enough that its rotor wash shook needles loose from branches. Galen shoved Sarah under a fallen log and pressed his own face into wet moss. The beam swept over the log, paused, then moved on. A second later, a voice carried through the trees, close and flat. Movement on the ridge, someone said. Galen waited until the hum softened, then pulled Sarah free. Her breathing rattled now, and fever had turned her skin slick. The pulse under her sleeve beat like a second heart, impatient and strange. Galen kept his voice low. Stay with me, he said, we are not done. Behind them, the drone hum rose again, thicker than before, and the forest began to glow with searching light. Soon after sunset, the Blackpine Range turned mean. Wind slid down the ravines and carried the drone hum like a second weather system. Galen kept Sarah moving under the trees, downhill and away from the ridge where Colonel Rowan Cade had spoken his name to the basin. Sarah stumbled every few steps. The suture foam held, but blood still seeped in slow warmth against Galen's palm when he steadied her. Her skin felt too slick, fever rising under cold air, and the pulse on her wrist flashed through cloth, impatient and tight. Galen found the creek again by sound before he saw it. Mossline Creek ran black and fast, fed by snowmelt and shadow. He stepped in first and gasped as the cold bit through his boots like teeth. He pulled Sarah in after him and guided her along the channel, keeping their steps in the current. The water reached her calves and she stiffened, then forced herself forward without a sound. Above the bank, lights swept in clean arcs, and Galen offered the drones only moving water and breath held low. They climbed out under a fallen spruce where the ground dipped. Galen pressed Sarah into the hollow and waited, headlamp off, hands numb. He could not afford even a thin circle of light. A voice drifted through the trees, not shouting, just present. Hold the line, someone said. Do not rush him. Galen recognized the cadence from earlier. Warden Luke Marrow was close enough that each boot crunch sounded deliberate. A handheld light clicked on and skimmed the creek surface. Galen held Sarah's shoulders and felt her shake, and she raised a hand to her mouth to smother a cough. The pulse at her wrist slowed for a breath, as if it heard danger too, then resumed its tight rhythm. The light moved on. Another voice, farther back, spoke into a radio. "Null cage is stable," the voice said. "Signal floor is clean." Galen felt the words like a lock turning. Minutes stretched and snapped. The drones looped with method, and Galen realized the search was not a wave. It was a net being tightened until there was nowhere left to hide. He leaned close to Sarah. "Can you walk?" he asked. Sarah nodded once, then winced and pressed her fingers to the wristband, warning him again not to touch. "I will not touch it," Galen said. "Just tell me what you need." Sarah forced the words out, raw and broken. "Hi," she whispered. "Wind, window." Galen looked up through branches where stars were fading behind cloud. His dream had always been up there, clean and far, but tonight the sky felt like a timer. Near midnight, the temperature dropped another notch. Sarah's shaking turned violent, and Galen stopped under a boulder overhang to press the ration heat brick against her ribs. It was half-used and barely warm, but it kept her from folding into herself. From the slope above, a twig snapped, then another answered. Not an animal, not careless. Galen pulled Sarah to her feet. "Keep your feet under you," he said. "No falls." Sarah nodded and gripped his sleeve so hard her nails pressed through fabric. They slipped into a narrow gully that angled toward higher ground, and behind them boots kept coming, patient and sure. An hour later, the trees thinned and the wind sharpened. Galen knew the slope ahead because locals talked about it like a place that punished mistakes. Cinder Ridge Overlook was a bare spine of rock, exposed to gusts and visible from Ravenfall Basin like a scar. Sarah tugged his sleeve and pointed upward, eyes glassy but intent. "There," she said. "We go there," Galen replied. He kept his voice steady because fear would slow them. Sarah nodded, then fumbled in her pocket and produced a thin square of material. Not paper, not plastic, more like a flexible plate that held a faint pattern under the dark. When she tilted it toward starlight, lines appeared, pale and precise. It was a map of time, not land, and Galen understood the idea before he understood the design. "A signal window map?" he asked. Sarah gave him a tired half-smile. "Only short," she said. "Open when sky angle right, then close." Galen did not ask how the sky angle mattered. He did not need the mechanics to understand the pressure. Only the rule that time was running out. "If we miss it, what happens?" he asked. "Haven seal locks," Sarah said. "Refuge claim not exist." She swallowed and added, "Not exist to compact." Galen felt his stomach drop. "Then they call you hazard only," he said. Sarah nodded without looking at him. She lowered her voice until it was almost lost in the wind. "Then quiet ledger," she whispered. The name landed like a cold coin in Galen's chest. "So the claim is protection," Galen said, "not comfort, protection." Sarah pressed her palm over the wristband, hiding the pulse, but the light still bled through her fingers. Galen tightened his grip on her elbow and started the climb again. The wind grew stronger, and the cold stripped sweat into ice. Galen kept Sarah close to the rock face, using boulders as brakes, but every stop risked the search net catching up. Below them, drone beams started to converge with less wandering and more certainty. A loudspeaker voice carried up the slope, calm and firm. "Ridgelines are priority," the voice said. "Cut off all high ground." Galen knew it was Colonel Rowan Cade. Cade had guessed the same thing. High ground meant a line out, and high ground meant a witness. A gust hit Sarah and nearly toppled her. Galen caught her before she fell, and the noise of their boots on gravel felt loud enough to be seen. Sarah's breathing turned ragged, and she lifted her sleeve to look at the wristband. The pulse had changed again. It was segmented now, repeating in sets like a countdown, and Galen did not need numbers to feel the window closing. "How long?" he asked. "Minutes," Sarah said. "Not many." Galen pushed onward, The last stretch to the overlook was a slanted ramp with nothing to hide behind. And if a drone looked up at the right moment, they would be lit like targets. They crawled the final meters, and wind roared over the ridge and stole their breath. When Galen lifted his head above the lip, he saw lights on the far side. Portable arrays stood anchored into rock, dark frames like ribs, and their low hum felt in his teeth. A cluster of people moved around them, bundled and focused, and one raised a long optic device to scan the ridge. The signal interdiction unit had arrived first, and Galen felt the ridge shrink into a trap. He pulled back, heart hammering. Sarah tried to speak, but her jaw shook too hard to form words. The pulse flared bright through her sleeve, then dimmed, then flared again. It did not sound like hope. It sounded like time. The first strike was not a gunshot. It was a spotlight snapping on. A beam that raked the ridge, hit rock, and bounced into Galen's eyes. He jerked back and dragged Sarah with him, sliding on gravel. A voice called through the wind. "Stay where you are," someone shouted, hands visible. The words were meant to sound like safety. Galen did not answer. He hauled Sarah along the lee side of the ridge, keeping low, and the interdiction team moved fast without panic. They were trained to close distance without giving a target a straight line. Sarah clutched her side and made a small sound that the wind almost hid. Galen felt her weight sag, and he knew that if she went down here, she would not get up again. He pulled her behind a jagged boulder and checked the slope. Below, lights were climbing. Above, a drone hovered, stable as a hawk, its beam searching for movement in steady sweeps. The null cage frames on the ridge hummed with a low vibration that Galen felt in his teeth. Sarah grabbed his wrist and forced words out, each one a scrape. "They block," she said, "window still, but cage eats it. Then we get away from the cage," Galen said. Sarah nodded. She pointed along the ridgeline toward a section where the rock dipped and the wind blew clean, away from the anchored frames. They moved in short bursts. Gravel shifted under their boots, and the ridge offered no cover, only angles. Galen counted the beat of the drone beam and moved in the gaps. He had never imagined using his hiking instincts to outrun a government net. A gust hit again. Sarah's foot slid and she dropped to one knee with a sharp intake of breath. Galen caught her, but the ration heat brick slipped from his pocket and bounced once on rock. It slid, teetered, then dropped over the edge into darkness. Galen watched it go and felt the loss like a physical blow. Sarah looked at his face and understood what fell. She shook her head, almost apologizing, then forced herself up, jaw clenched against the cold. Below them, boots scraped closer. A voice carried through a portable speaker, calm and amplified so it cut through the wind. "Galen Roane, you are on a sealed perimeter," Colonel Rowan Cade said. "Do not make this worse." Galen froze for half a second. Cade was not yelling. He sounded like a man trying to keep a fire from touching a fuel line. "You do not know what a single transmission can trigger," Cade continued. "If it crosses, it becomes a claim. If it becomes a claim, someone else has to answer." Galen pressed Sarah behind another rock. Her eyes were half-lidded, fever pulling her down, and the pulse at her wrist kept stuttering, bright then dim, as if it was arguing with the cage. Galen leaned close. "You said they will not let you live," he whispered. "Why not detain you? Why the ledger?" Sarah's mouth tightened. She looked toward the basin lights, then back to Galen, and when she spoke, it was steady in a way that scared him. "Because of Vesper Accord," she said. Galen blinked. "What is that?" he asked. "Quiet deal," Sarah said. "Not public, not compact." She fought for words, then went simpler. "Some on Earth want my refuge tech," she said. "They want the seal logic. They want how claims bind." Galen felt cold spread behind his ribs. "Your wristband is leverage," he said. Sarah nodded. "Cade tries stop war," Sarah said. "He fears signal. He fears escalation." She paused, breath trembling. "But others fear losing advantage," she said. "They would take me in a race record. They would sell pieces through quiet ledger." Galen stared at her. It was not a story of heroes and monsters. Only a system with competing hungers. Cade might be a wall, but walls could still crush people pressed against them. A spotlight flared again and washed the rock. A figure appeared through blowing snow dust. Visor down, moving with intent. Contact on the ridge, someone shouted. Galen grabbed Sarah and ran along the narrow spine toward the thinner wind. His lungs burned, and the ground tilted down toward a saddle where rock met scrub. If they reached the saddle, they could drop into trees again and lose the ridge teams. Sarah stumbled, then kept going. Her will was the only thing holding her upright. The pulse suddenly brightened, not like a warning, but like a decision. A thin line of light slipped out from under her sleeve and pointed upward for a heartbeat, as if it tried to handshake with the sky. Then the line snapped off. The pulse went dim, almost dead. Sarah stopped walking. Her eyes widened, and she lifted her wrist with shaking hands, trying to understand the silence. Galen caught her shoulders. "Is that it?" he asked. "Did it start?" "Almost," Sarah said, voice small. "It tried." Boots closed in behind them. A drone dipped low and the beam steadied, pinning them in white light as if it had finally found the right shape. Galen looked down the slope toward the saddle. Trees waited there, dark and close, a way out that was shrinking by seconds. He tightened his grip on Sarah. "One more chance," he said. "Tell me where?" Sarah swallowed hard and forced her eyes toward the far edge of the ridge. Past the last cage frame. The pulse on her wrist did not count anymore. It simply waited, like a door that would open once, then never again. Somewhere below, the basin lights glowed as the night thinned toward dawn. Near dawn, the ridge wind tore at Galen's jacket and made every breath hurt. The drone beam still searched behind them, but the loudspeaker voice had gone quiet. Sarah leaned into Galen as they slid down the far side of the rock spine. Her fever left her skin damp, and her hands shook when she tried to cover the glow at her wrist. The pulse was no longer counting in neat sets. It was waiting, faint, like a match held near tinder. Galen kept to the rough crease where stone met scrub. He avoided open snow patches and chose dark rock, because dark rock held less contrast under thermal scans. They dropped into a shallow gully and crawled under blown branches until the ridge lights softened behind them. A low hum returned from the null cage frames on the crest. The sound carried through the ground like a distant generator. Sarah whispered, "Window soon." Galen replied, "I know. We need a place the cage does not reach." They reached old relay cutline, a straight scar through the trees from a long abandoned repeater. The corridor was too clean, too easy for a drone to map, but it also ran fast toward higher ground. Galen spoke low. "If the claim is law, we need proof it was tried, something that survives their cleanup." Sarah blinked slowly. "Yes," she said. Galen opened the camera and set it to record, then angled it toward her wrist without touching. He used his other hand to steady her elbow, careful not to bump the band. Sarah lifted her sleeve. The band brightened for a breath, then dimmed again, as if the cage swallowed its voice. Galen kept recording. He captured her face, the pulsing light, and the way the light changed when they moved a few steps. A faint crackle came from the trees ahead. Not radio, not wind, a human throat clearing. A man stepped into the cutline and spoke. "Stop right there," he said. Galen froze. The figure wore a headset and a thin vest over winter gear. He held a tablet and a small directional antenna. "My name is Soren Pike," the man said. "Signal technician. Do not point that band at the ridge." Sarah pulled her sleeve down fast. "Are you with them?" Galen asked. Soren looked past Galen, then back. His eyes were tired, as if he had not slept since the crash. "I am with the Terran Containment Authority," Soren said. "I am not with the people who want to erase you." "Then why are you here?" Galen asked. "Because the cage has a blind seam," Soren said. "The terrain breaks it. I saw where the null floor lifts for a minute when wind shifts and the coils rebalance. Your ridge was the wrong place." Soren turned his tablet so Galen could see a simple contour map. He pointed at a bend in the cutline where a basalt outcrop rose like a tooth. "There," Soren said. "Weak coverage. Still bad, but not dead. If you stand on the lee side and keep your body between the band and the frames, you might get a burst out. Why help us? Galen asked. Soren swallowed. Because I logged the first pulse change when you touched it in the basin. He said, that made you a witness. If you vanish, the only record becomes their record. Galen kept recording, capturing Soren's face and the map. You have maybe an hour, Soren said. After that, they tighten the net and the seam is gone. Use the cut line until the bend. Then drop low. Do not trust the first checkpoint you see. A drone passed overhead, distant, and Soren flinched. I have to go back, Soren said. If they see me missing, they will assume you are near. He stepped into the trees, then paused. If you meet a doctor named Inez Halden, listen to her, Soren said. Then he was gone. Galen took Sarah's hand and pulled her forward. We follow his bend, Galen said, then we try once. Sarah nodded, jaw tight. The pulse flickered, a small answering beat. The basalt outcrop gave them a pocket of thinner interference and a pocket of brutal wind. Galen tucked Sarah into the lee and lifted his phone again, recording her wrist from a careful distance. The band glowed, then stumbled, as if the air itself pushed back. A thin tone tried to form, then vanished. Sarah sagged. Again? She whispered. Not yet, Galen said. You cannot take another hit like this. Her fever was climbing. Her shaking had turned to small violent tremors that stole her balance. Footsteps came along the cut line. Slow and single, a woman stepped into view with a medical pack and a low headlamp. The name strip on her jacket read Dr. Inez Halden. Do not move, Dr. Halden said. I am not here to grab her. Galen kept Sarah behind him. Then why are you here? Galen asked. Colonel Rowan Cade wants her alive, Dr. Halden said. He sent me because he does not trust cold and blood loss to wait on paperwork. Sarah watched Inez with a thin, wary focus. Inez stayed a few paces back and opened her pack. She set 2 items on the ground and slid them forward with her boot. Then pulled her hands away. A strip of basic antibiotics. A small single-use injector for fever control. Galen did not pick them up yet. Why help us? Galen asked. Dr. Halden looked past him, as if listening to the forest. Because I still see a patient, she said. Because if she dies, the report will say the same thing either way. Sarah whispered, quiet ledger, and her voice broke on the words. Inez flinched. She did not deny it. There are channels inside this operation that I do not like, Dr. Halden said. I cannot stop them alone. I can keep her alive long enough for your proof to matter. Galen took the antibiotics and the injector. Tell me how, Galen said. 1 tablet now, Dr. Halden said. Injector into the thigh. Slow press. Watch her breathing. If she shakes worse, stop. Galen gave Sarah the tablet with a sip of water. Then used the injector the way Inez showed. Sarah grimaced, then exhaled, and for a moment her eyes looked less lost. A radio chirp snapped in the trees. Inez's shoulders tightened. She touched her headset, listened, then let her hand fall. They counted my supplies, Dr. Halden said. They will know I diverted them. Lights began to sweep through the trunks behind her. Steady and organized, a loudspeaker voice carried close. Dr. Inez Halden, step away from the subjects, Colonel Rowan Cade said. Inez raised her hands and faced the beams. I treated a patient, Dr. Halden said. You interfered with an outcome, Cade said. That ends now. 2 officers reached her. They took her pack and her headset with clean motions. Inez did not resist, but she looked once toward Galen, her expression flat with warning. Galen pulled Sarah into the trees and moved. The meds in his pocket felt heavier than food, because now he knew, if he failed, Sarah vanished. If he failed, Inez would be crushed and written off as a mistake. Wind rose as the sky began to pale. Galen and Sarah left the trees and stepped onto broken stone where there was no cover. Only rock and moving air. Sarah pressed a hand over the band at her wrist, as if she could hold the last beats inside her skin. Boots crunched behind them, measured and unhurried, Colonel Rowan Cade walked up the slope with 2 officers held back. He carried no rifle, only a handset and a comm that made the ground feel claimed. "You are boxed in," Colonel Rowan Cade said. "Warden Luke Marrow is on your left. Signal interdiction unit is behind you." Galen kept his voice low. "Then stop and let us go," he said. Cade watched him for a breath. "I am trying to stop something bigger than you," Cade said. "A single burst can turn a quiet containment into an open conflict." He looked at Sarah without awe, the way a commander looks at a risk. "Sarah Vell," Cade said, "Haven Seal Bearer, refuge claim pending." Sarah stiffened. Galen felt cold rise in him. Cade knew her full name, and that meant the system had been reading the band through the cage. Cade shifted to Galen. "You did a good thing," Cade said. "Now do the responsible thing and step away." "If I hand her over, she disappears," Galen said. Cade did not flinch. "If you keep her, this region becomes a battleground," Cade said. "People will panic, governments will posture, the wrong person will fire first." Galen swallowed. "And your people have a ledger," Galen said, "a place where witnesses vanish." Cade held his gaze a long moment. "There are people inside any system who want leverage," Cade said. "I spend my life trying to keep them from lighting a fuse." Sarah gripped Galen's sleeve and shook her head. Her other hand trembled as she traced a small rectangle in the air. Then drew a line through it, like a file being erased. "Quiet ledger," Sarah whispered. "Disappear." Cade saw the gesture, his jaw tightened by a fraction. "I cannot control every office," Cade said. "I can control my custody while she is with me." Galen heard what Cade did not say. "While she is with me." Cade took a step closer, stopping at a distance that felt like a boundary. "Here is my offer," Cade said. "You hand her and the Haven Seal to me. You walk away alive. Your record is sealed under the silence warrant. You go back to ordinary life." It was a clean deal for a tired man. Galen felt the temptation like warmth. Galen thought of Dr. Inez Halden standing under lights with empty hands. He thought of Soren Pike risking his job for a seam on a map. People inside the perimeter were making choices too, and their choices would be punished if Galen folded. He tightened his grip on the phone. The file on it was small, but it was real. It was the only proof he could carry. The pulse flared under Sarah's palm. It beat in a short set. Then another, like the last knocks on a closing door. Sarah's hand shook so hard she could barely keep contact. Galen lifted his phone, still recording, and looked at Cade. "If I choose wrong, she dies," Galen said. Cade's voice stayed calm. "If you choose wrong, far more die," Colonel Rowan Cade said. Wind tore across the stone. The officers behind Cade waited with restraints. Not rifles. Ahead of Galen, the slope dropped into open ground where drones could see everything. Sarah leaned into Galen, voice thin. "Now," Sarah said. Galen felt the last beats through her sleeve. The decision was no longer a plan. It was a clock in his hands. Dawn bled into the Blackpine Range like a thin apology. The wind still cut, but the light made the rocks feel less like a trap and more like a stage. Galen stood with Sarah in the open. No trees left to hide behind. Only stone and air. Colonel Rowan Cade watched them from a few paces away. 2 officers waited behind him with restraints. Not rifles. The calm in that choice made Galen's stomach twist. Sarah's hand was on her wrist, covering the pulse. Even through cloth, Galen felt the last beats shiver against her skin, as if the band itself was holding its breath. "Sponsor, or nothing," Sarah whispered. "Tell me what to do," Galen said. "Step away from her, Galen," Cade said. "Do not escalate this." Galen did not look at Cade. He looked at Sarah. Her eyes were glassy with fever, but sharp with intent. She pulled her sleeve back just enough to show the band. The glow was thin now, less like a lamp and more like an ember. "Haven Seal accepts only voluntary sponsor," Sarah said. "If not, claim fails." "Sponsor means I take responsibility?" Galen asked. Sarah nodded. "You become anchor," Sarah said. "You become named. You become hunted by process." Galen felt the weight land. A dream he had carried since childhood had finally come true. And it smelled like cold blood and burned metal. It was not a gift. It was a burden. Cade stepped closer, still calm. "You are a decent man," Colonel Rowan. Cade said. "Decent men do not throw sparks into fuel." Galen heard the logic. He also heard the trap. If he stepped away, Sarah vanished into whatever office was willing to dirty its hands. If he stayed, he became a problem that could not be neatly erased. Sarah raised her trembling hand and placed it over Galen's, guiding him without touching the band yet. "First rule," Sarah said, "no wrong open. Wrong open kills me, and burns record around." Galen nodded once. "Then we do it right," he said. Sarah's fingers, shaking with cold and fever, moved in a pattern above the band. She traced a small arc, then a pause, then a press point. It looked like a gesture designed for hands that might be injured or wearing gloves. An interface built for desperation. "You must say sponsor words," Sarah said. "Simple, clear." "In your language?" Galen asked. Sarah shook her head. "In yours," Sarah said. "Compact accepts human sponsor." Cade's voice sharpened by a fraction. Not anger, urgency. "Galen, do not," Colonel Rowan. Cade said. "Once it is logged, it cannot be unlogged. You will be taken. Your life will be sealed under warrants you do not understand." "I understand enough," Galen said. He looked at Sarah. "What are the words?" he asked. Sarah exhaled, and her breath shook. "I claim sponsorship for Sarah Vell," Sarah said. "I accept custody duties under Astor Refuge Compact." Galen repeated it once, slow. Sarah nodded. "Now," Sarah said, "touch here." She guided his fingertip to a point on the band. Her skin was cold as creek water. Galen pressed lightly. The pulse brightened, then held steady. It did not race. That steadiness felt like a test passed. "Hold," Sarah said, "then slide." Galen held his finger in place, counted his own heartbeats, then slid the way she showed. The band warmed under his skin. Not hot, just alive, like a device waking from sleep. A thin tone rose, barely audible, and Galen felt it more than heard it. A vibration like a phone trying to connect in a dead zone. Sarah's face tightened with pain. She made a small sound, and Galen saw tears gather at the corner of her eyes. She did not pull away. "Stay with me," Galen said. Sarah nodded once. The band flashed, and a narrow thread of light snapped upward, clean and straight, like a pointer aimed at sky. It lasted less than a second. Then it stopped. For a moment, Galen thought it had failed. Then the band pulsed again. Softer. A faint line of text appeared on the inner rim. It read, "Claim logged. Sponsor verified." Galen's knees almost gave out. The relief was physical, like oxygen after a long breath held. Cade stared at the band, then at Galen. The calm in his face did not break. But Galen saw something tighten behind his eyes. The recognition of an event crossing a boundary. "Detain Galen Roane," Colonel Rowan. Cade said. The officers moved. Galen did not resist. He lifted his hands, palms out, and let the restraints bite his wrists. Sarah swayed on her feet. Cade caught her elbow, steadying her with the care of someone who did not want a death on his report. Cade spoke low, only for Galen. "You just made this real," he said. "It was real when she bled in my cabin," Galen said. Cade did not answer. He turned and signaled the Ridge team to pull back from the null frames. The crisis had shifted from containment to custody, and that meant a different set of rules. 2 hours later, Ravenfall Basin looked like a controlled accident. Tape lines held hikers back. Temporary signs warned of hazardous material. Helicopter blades beat the air far above the ridge, and clean-suited teams moved in and out of the impact scar with sealed cases. Etta Bryce stood at a folding table beside a portable printer, her expression composed and unreadable. She spoke to a cluster of officers and wrote as she talked, turning speech into paper that could outlive guilt. "Initiate cleanline protocol," Etta Bryce said. "Cause: unknown aerial debris. Public narrative: weather anomaly. Witness narrative: unreliable." An assistant asked, What about the sponsor claim? Etta did not look up. We do not deny the compact. Etta Bryce said, we bury it under classification. Colonel Rowan Cade approached, his boots clean, his eyes tired. He held a thin tablet with a status feed. The refuge claim has been logged outside our perimeter, Colonel Rowan Cade said. Etta's pen paused for half a beat. Outside? Etta Bryce asked. Yes, Cade said. The burst escaped. It was received by an external relay. The Astor Refuge Compact Office has an automatic entry now. We can stall. We cannot erase. Etta's jaw tightened. Then we control what the public sees. Etta Bryce said, we keep the sponsor in silence. We keep the claimant alive and quiet. Cade watched her. Alive, Colonel Rowan Cade said. Etta replied, alive in custody. Cade looked toward the medical tent where Dr. Inez Halden stood without a headset. Hands empty, face pale, an officer held her credentials in a sealed bag. What did you do to Halden? Cade asked. She broke protocol, Etta Bryce said. She treated a patient, Cade said. Etta's eyes stayed flat. That is not what the record will say, Etta Bryce said. Cade did not argue, because he knew arguing with paperwork was a slow war. Instead, he turned and walked toward the holding vehicle where Galen sat cuffed. Wrists numb, collar damp with sweat and cold. A guard opened the door enough for Cade to speak. You will be held under silence warrant authority, Colonel Rowan Cade said. You will not speak to media. You will not speak to family. Your communications will be monitored. And her? Galen asked. Cade's eyes flicked toward the medical tent. She will be transferred under compact custody, Cade said. That is the price of your claim. You cannot put her in the quiet ledger now, Galen said. Cade did not deny its existence. Not without triggering a violation that becomes public, Cade said. Not now. Galen leaned forward as far as the cuffs allowed. So you will try something else, he said. Cade's voice stayed calm. I will try to keep this from becoming war, Cade said. And I will try to keep you alive long enough to matter. It was not comfort. It was the closest thing to it. Outside, Sarah emerged from the medical tent supported by two medics. Her face was drained, lips pale, but she was upright. A compact transport case stood open beside her, lined with insulated material and straps designed to hold a body stable in motion. Sarah looked around once, eyes scanning the perimeter, the officers, the cameras being kept at distance. Then she found Galen through the vehicle window. She did not smile. She did not wave. She simply held his gaze for a long breath and pressed her fingers to her wristband. Then to her chest. Then outward. A small gesture that felt like a promise. The medics guided her into the transport and closed it. The latch clicked. The case was carried toward a helicopter with no markings. Galen watched until it disappeared into spinning air. A week later, Galen sat in a room that smelled of recycled air and disinfectant. The light never changed. The questions came in shifts. Always polite, always clipped, always written down. An investigator said, state your full name and confirm you initiated the sponsor claim. Galen said, my name is Galen Roane. I initiated the sponsor claim for Sarah Vell. The investigator asked, did you understand the consequences? Galen said, I understand them now. They asked about the crash, about the band, about Dr. Inez Halden, about Soren Pike. Galen answered what he could without feeding the machine that wanted to fold everything into a neat narrative. At the end of one session, a guard slid a thin paper under the door. It was not a letter. It was a printed receipt, and it carried a compact header and a verification seal. It read, sponsor acknowledgement. Claimant transfer recorded. Custody chain active. Galen read it twice. It was the first time in days his chest felt lighter. Sarah existed on paper in a place the quiet ledger could not easily touch. Across the facility, Dr. Inez Halden stood before a review board. Her license was not revoked, but her access was. She was reassigned, sidelined, turned into a warning for others. When she passed Galen in a corridor under guard, she did not speak. She only met his eyes for a second, and in that second Galen saw no regret. Colonel Rowan Cade stood alone in a briefing room and watched a report scroll on a screen. The words were calm, the kind that made disasters sound manageable. Containment successful. Escalation avoided. External compact notification received. Public narrative stable. Cade stared at the line that mattered most. External compact notification received. He closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them. He had prevented the immediate fire. He had also created a permanent fact, one that would not go away when the perimeter tape came down. Some truths were like cracks in stone. They did not close. They widened with time. That night, Galen received one more printed slip through his door. It was short, plain, and stamped as an authorized compact message. It read, "To sponsor Galen Roane. Claimant Sarah Vell acknowledges custody duties. Thank you for voluntary anchor. This message is valid under Astor Refuge Compact." Galen held the paper in both hands. There was no magic in it. No miracle. Only process used for mercy instead of erasure. He sat on his bunk and let the silence settle. Outside his locked room, the system kept moving. Inside it, one ordinary person had said, "I will sponsor," and the system had been forced to pivot. Galen closed his eyes and listened to his own breathing. Slow and steady, like a pulse that refused to be turned off. As the lights in Galen's cell held steady, he kept the compact receipt folded in his palm like a small, stubborn proof. Outside the walls, officials would argue over language, jurisdiction, and risk, but inside his chest the answer stayed simple. Sarah had been reduced to an item in a ledger, and he had refused to let her stay there. He did not win a clean victory, and Colonel Rowan Cade did not lose in any easy way. The system simply had to turn, because one ordinary witness made the truth official. And in a world built on procedures and silence, sometimes the bravest act is not fighting at all. Sometimes it is standing still, signing your name, and saying, "I will be the anchor." If this ending stayed with you, please like the video, share it with someone who loves grounded science fiction, and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next story.